Kiss a masked stranger, Rhoda, any one of them, or own to this room that no man has ever asked you to. The words carried the whole length of the orangery at Ambervale the way cruelty always carried, cleanly on a lull in the music, as though the house had been built to conduct it. Emery Vane did not move. He stood in the black between two lemon trees in a hired domino with a half-mask of moulded silk tied over his brow, and he had been standing there a quarter of an hour, because the alternative was the ballroom, and the ballroom at present held 4 mothers, who knew his rent roll to the shilling. He had come into the county on a question of drainage. He had stayed for the dark. He had not intended to overhear anything whatsoever. Cressida, a second voice, unhurried. You are making a wager of me in front of 11 people. 12. And it is not a wager, it is a kindness. Everybody is masked. Nobody can see how you are dressed or how you are not. It will never come again, Rhoda, one night in your entire life, when a man might kiss you without knowing what he was kissing. Somebody laughed, high and pleased. Emery discovered with mild surprise that his jaw had set. And if I do it? Then I shall say you did, and we shall all be astonished. And you may go home in the second carriage and be as dull as you like for another 12 months. And if I refuse? Then you refuse, said Cressida sweetly, and we shall all know why. There was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds. Emery had spent a great deal of his life in rooms where the next 3 seconds decided something, and he knew the quality of that silence. It was not a woman gathering her courage. It was a woman pricing a thing and finding the price fair. Very well, said Rhoda, but I shall choose him, not you. That was not the... It was the dare, Cressida. A masked stranger. You did not say which, and you will not say which, or the whole of it is yours and none of it is mine, and I will not be dared into a thing you have already arranged. 4 months would pass before the Duke of Quenby understood what one unclaimed kiss in a cold orangery had cost him, and by the time he understood it the bill would come due in public, in his own name, at the top of his own voice, in front of every person who had ever been afraid of him. He would pay it gladly. That was the part that would take him the longest to learn. He heard her come. Not the rustle first, but the pause before it, a woman stopping at the edge of the lamplight to let her eyes take the dark. Then the slow tap of heel on flagstone, past the first lemon tree, past the second, until she stood an arm's length off, and he could see the shape of her, a plain gown of some dull green, a mask of black papeton with a strip of yellow lace that had been torn and knotted rather than replaced. Sir, she said, I am going to ask you something absurd, and you are entirely at liberty to say no. Ask it. My sister has dared me to kiss a masked stranger. I mean to do it, because I would rather do a foolish thing of my own choosing than a sensible thing of hers. But I will not have it done to a man who has not agreed. So, may I? Emery looked at her a moment. Somewhere behind them a quadrille began. On one condition. Name it. That you take nothing from it you did not come for, he said. No names, no house, nothing you might dine out on. Sir, I have never dined out in my life. He heard the smile in it. I do not know your face and I do not want it. A stranger is only a person one has not yet had the chance to be rude to. Let us leave you unspoiled. And she reached up, put one cold hand flat against his jaw as though steadying a horse, and kissed him. It was not a long kiss. It was not a practiced one. It was, he thought afterwards, the single most honest thing anyone had done to him in 11 years. Because there was nothing in it she could possibly want from a man with no name, and she did it with her eyes open and her chin up, and when it was finished she stepped back and inclined her head like a fencer. Thank you, said Rhoda. You have been very good about it. Then she was gone up the flags into the light, and the laughter rose to meet her, and Emery Vane stood among the lemon trees with his heart going like a colt in a stall, and a torn strip of yellow lace in his hand, because it had come loose against his cuff, and she had not stopped for it. He went after her. Of course he went after her. He got as far as the supper room and no further, because the supper room contained Sir Denholm Fire, magistrate bondholder, and the loudest man in 3 parishes, who was at that moment holding forth over a plate of ham, the Lisle girl. Companion to my Cressida and lucky in it. The father was a surveyor decent enough, dead these 6 years and owing me 200 on a bond secured against the cottage at Lisle's End. Simple arithmetic, sir. She stops in that house. She keeps that roof over the old woman who reared her, and she stops sweet. The note falls in at Michaelmas, and there is not 40 shillings in the world that girl can call her own. And if she should leave? Sir Denholm laughed until his glass shook. Where would she go? The cottage goes to the Hammer, the old woman goes on the parish, and Miss Rhoda Lyle goes with her. No, sir. That one does not walk out of anywhere. That one is fixed. Emory stood in the doorway with a stranger's mask on his face and a stranger's lace in his fist, and understood, with perfect clarity, that he had just been kissed by a woman who could not afford to be kissed. 9 days after the masquerade, Sir Denholm Fire came to Quenby to solicit a duke's interest in a canal, and brought 2 women with him. Emory received them in the long drawing room, because the long drawing room had a window at his back, and men who wanted things from him found it hard to speak into the light. Paget, his steward, stood by the door with the estate book under his arm, and the expression of a man who had been told the visit would take 20 minutes. "Your Grace is very good," said Sir Denholm. "My ward, Miss Cressida Fire, and her companion." The companion did not curtsy deeply. She curtsied exactly as much as was owed, which in Emory's experience nobody in the county had managed in 9 years, and then she went and stood at the end of the room by the fire screen with her hands folded, and did not look at him again. He knew the voice at once. He had known it before she reached the middle of the carpet. "Miss Lyle," said Emory, "Your Grace, you are cold. Come nearer the fire." "I am at the fire, Your Grace. I am simply not in front of it." Sir Denholm laughed too loudly and began upon the canal. Emory let him run. He watched, instead, the sleeve at the end of the room and the cuff of it, where a strip of yellow Bruges lace had been let in above the wrist, mended with small ugly stitches where it had been torn. He had that lace. It was in a drawer in his book room, upstairs, 30 feet above Sir Denholm's head. He said nothing. He could not, afterwards, account for why, and the subscription would want a name at the top of it. Sir Denholm was saying, "A name of weight." "My own affairs are in good order, Your Grace, all of them. I keep my books like a churchwarden." "Do you carry them?" "Beg pardon?" "Your books. You are asking me for £4,000. Do you carry them?" Sir Denholm reddened, then rallied, and sent his man out to the carriage, and it was done partly to save his face and partly, Emory thought, for another reason altogether, because when the ledger came in Sir Denholm did not open it himself. "Miss Lyle reads a figure better than I do. Her father taught her, poor fellow, for one of a son. Read out the Lyle account, Rhoda, and his Grace will see what sort of man he is dealing with. It is the plainest thing in the book. 200 at 5 per centum, 6 years, and I have never once pressed her." There was a small silence of the kind Emory was beginning to recognize. "You wish me to read out my own debt," said Rhoda. "I wish you to read out my kindness." "Very well." She took the ledger and did not sit down with it. She held it up on her forearm like a hymn book and read in a clear, unhurried, entirely level voice. "Bond of the 14th of April, 6 years since. Principal, £200. Interest at 5 per centum per annum, simple as the bond is written. 6 years at £10 is 60. £260, of which £42 has been paid off in wages foregone, which Sir Denholm has been good enough to enter here in his own hand. £218 outstanding." "240, said Sir Denholm. 218, sir." "The account says 240. "The account has the interest compounded at the quarter days," said Rhoda. "The bond says simple. I have the bond. It is in the tin box at Lyle's End with my father's license and my mother's ring, and it says simple in your own clerk's hand, and it is witnessed." Nobody spoke. The fire spat. "Paget," said Emory, "Your Grace, take the book. Cast the Lyle account." Paget took the book to the window and was quiet for perhaps a minute and a half, and Emory watched Rhoda Lyle stand absolutely still at the end of the room with her chin level and her hands folded and a torn piece of lace on her cuff, and thought, "She has been waiting 6 years to say that out loud, and she has just said it to a man who can make it stick." "The lady is correct, Your Grace," said Paget. "It is compounded, £22 over. An error of my clerk's," said Sir Denholm. "Then it will be an easy thing to correct," said Emory pleasantly. "Miss Lyle, you will oblige me by initialing the entry. Paget will witness it." Sir Denholm, as to the canal, bring me your books and I will read them myself. I am not in the habit of subscribing to arithmetic I have not seen. They were gone within the half-hour. From the window Emery watched Cressida take her companion's arm on the gravel and say something into her ear, smiling all the while, and watched Rhoda Lyle receive it without the least change of face and climb into the carriage last. Paget came and stood beside him. £22, said Paget. She risked her roof for £22. No, said Emery. She risked her roof to say a true thing in a room where nobody wanted it. The £22 was incidental. He was still watching the carriage. What is at Lyle's End? A cottage and 4 acres, your grace. The old woman, Mrs. Halloway, who reared the girl. Her sight is nearly gone. She makes bone lace by the feel of it and sells it at Norwich twice a year, and by all accounts keeps a stricter house than my own. And the bond falls in when? Michaelmas. Emery said nothing for a moment. Upstairs, in a drawer, was a strip of yellow lace that matched the cuff of a woman who had just walked out of his house without once looking him in the face. He had meant to tell her. He had had 4 clear opportunities and had let all 4 of them pass. And he could not have said, under oath, why. Perhaps because a man who is only a stranger gets told the truth, and a duke does not. Perhaps because she had said, leave you unspoiled, and had meant it, and no one had ever wanted anything so small from him in his life. Paget, he said, does she read Latin? Your grace, find out. £40 a year, said Emery, and your board, and a fire in the room you work in, which I mention because the library at Quenby has not been warm since my grandfather's time, and I will not have it said I froze a scholar. Rhoda Lyle stood in the middle of 11,000 books and did not thank him. Why? Because the catalogue was made in 1761 by a chaplain who could not spell, and I have twice bought a book I already owned. That is why you want a cataloguer. It is not why you want me, Miss Lyle. Your Grace, I have been the object of 3 charities in my life, and each one wanted paying for in a currency I did not care to spend. So I will ask plainly, is this a post or is it a rescue? It is a post. Then I will have the terms of a post. Quarterly in advance and the first quarter today. A fortnight's notice on either side, given in writing, and I go home to Lyle's End on Saturdays, every Saturday, without asking leave. Agreed. You have not heard the last of it. If ever anyone in this house says I was given this, I shall put on my bonnet and go, and you will not talk me round. She looked up at last, and her eyes were grey and quite unfriendly. I mean to earn out that bond, sir. Every shilling of the 218. I have 5 months and I have counted it, and it can be done if I sell my mother's lace and my father's instruments and eat rather less than I should like. I am not asking you to admire the arithmetic. I am telling you so that you do not one day imagine you have done it for me. Miss Lyle, said Emery, if I ever imagine that, I give you leave to say so in front of whoever is standing nearest. I should have done it anyway, said Rhoda, and took the first quarter's £10 and counted it in front of him on the library table. So she came to Quenby, and the house changed by degrees the way a season changes, which is to say that nobody noticed until it had already happened. She worked from 9 until 4 with a shawl round her shoulders and her father's brass rule as a page weight. She would not be waited on. She carried her own coals the first week until the housekeeper wept about it, and then she permitted the coals and won the argument about the tea. She found the second folio of a herbal in a box of pamphlets and told Paget it was worth £90 and made him write it in the book, and when Emery said she might have kept quiet and no one the wiser, she looked at him as though he had suggested she pick a pocket. He fell into the habit of the library at 6 when the light went. He told himself it was the correspondence. You never look at me, he said once. I look at you a great deal, your grace. I simply do it when you are looking elsewhere, as everybody in this house does. You are very frightening, and it is entirely your own doing, is it? You are silent in rooms, said Rhoda, not lifting her pen. A silent man is a mirror. Everybody who comes near you sees only their own worst opinion of themselves and calls it your temper. Emery sat down slowly in the chair opposite. And what do you see? A man who has not been contradicted since he was 19 and is beginning to enjoy it. She blotted the line. Sit further off, sir, you block the lamp. On the third Saturday he rode to Lyle's End, because he wished to see the 4 acres, and stayed 2 hours because Mrs. Halloway put him a chair by the door and gave him small beer, and did not once ask him a question about himself. "You will forgive me not looking at you direct," she said. "I have about a shilling's worth of sight left, and I spend it on the lace. 51 years at the pillow. I can hear the pattern going wrong before I can feel it." Her fingers went on among the bobbins, quick as rain. "You are the Duke, then?" "I am. Rhoda says you are tolerable." "That is more than she says to me." "It is more than she has said of any man since her father died," said Mrs. Halloway, "so mind what you do with it." Michaelmas came on. In the second week of August, Sir Denholm Fire sent formal notice by an attorney's clerk, and did not come himself. Emery found her standing in the library with it, still in her bonnet, the seal broken. "The 29th of September, said Rhoda. "By noon at the vestry of Marlbrook Church, where the parish audit sits, which is where the bond was witnessed and where it must be redeemed. £240. 218. He has written 240. He has not corrected his book." She folded the paper along its old creases very exactly. "And there is a second letter from Cressida. She is to be married to him at Christmas. She says that if I will sign Lyle's End into her settlement, Sir Denholm will forgive the whole, and I may live in it rent-free for my lifetime, and everybody will be comfortable, and there is no need for any unpleasantness at Marlbrook. And it is a very kind letter," said Rhoda, "and I have read it 4 times, and it never once uses the word give. It says forgive, as though the debt were a sin of mine." She put both letters in her apron pocket. "The cottage was my mother's before it was my father's. I will not hand it to a man who cannot cast simple interest, to buy peace from a girl who once dared me in front of 12 people. I will be at Marlbrook on the 29th of September at 11 o'clock with the money in my hand, or I will be there with nothing and let them take it in the open, in front of the wardens, where everyone can see exactly what is being taken and from whom." "Miss Lyle." "Let me," said Rhoda. "That is the one thing you may not do, and I have told you why, and I shall not tell you again. 46 days. Emery sat down that night with the estate book open in front of him and did not write a word in it. The storm came in on the 11th of September and took the roof off the dairy, and by 9 that night the whole household was in the wet, and Rhoda Lyle was on the stable roof passing slates. "Come down," Emery shouted up. "I am lighter than any of them. Come down, and I will hold the ladder." "You will hold the ladder either way, your grace. You are that sort of man." They finished at midnight. Afterwards there was the library, and the fire built up shamefully high, and 2 people in wet wool drinking the housekeeper's black tea out of the cracked blue cups that were kept for servants, because nobody had thought to bring up others. "Your hands are bleeding," he said. "Slate does that." He took one of them anyway. She let him. He turned it to the firelight and looked at the small cuts across the pads of her fingers and did not let go, and neither of them said anything for a length of time that was, by any reasonable measure, indefensible. "Miss Lyle." "Yes." "On the 14th of June at Ambervale." "Don't." She took her hand back, but slowly, and she was smiling, which he had not expected. "Whatever you were going to say about that night, keep it. It is the one thing in my life that belongs to nobody but me. A stranger in the dark who asked nothing and gave nothing and did not know my name. If I let it into daylight, it becomes a story people tell, and Cressida will tell it, and it will be about her." She set the cup down. "I know you must have heard of it. Half the county heard of it." "Yes," said Emery, "I heard of it." And that was the moment. He knew it even then, sitting in the chair with the fire on his face. He could have said 4 words and been done. He said instead, "Good night, Miss Lyle," and went upstairs, and told himself he had been merciful. 3 days later he rode to Fire Court and bought the bond. Sir Denholm parted with it for £240 and a signature, and was so pleased with himself that he called for wine at 11 in the morning. Emery rode home with a folded parchment inside his coat and a lightness in him he had not felt since he was a boy, because it was going to be so simple. He would put it in her hand on the 29th, and she would burn it, and it would be over. "Your Grace." Paget at the mounting block, not moving out of the way. "Ask her first. She will refuse." "Yes," said Paget. "That is what asking is." The Quenby harvest dinner was on the 21st. 40 at the long table, the tenants at the low end, the county at the high, and Sir Denholm Fire halfway down with Cressida beside him in new blue silk. The claret went round twice. Then Sir Denholm stood up. "A health," he said, "to his Grace, who is a better man of business than he lets on, and a kinder one. There is a certain small paper of mine that has changed hands this week, and I am told I am not to speak of it. But I say a generosity ought to be spoken of. The Lisle bond is bought and paid. Miss Lisle need not trouble herself about Michaelmas at all. The table did the thing tables do. It went bright and interested. Rhoda Lisle was at the low end, where she had insisted on sitting, with the cracked blue cup nowhere in sight and a fork in her hand that she set down very quietly. £240, said Cressida, delighted, to the room at large. For a companion. Oh, Rhoda. First a kiss for a dare, and now a cottage. Nobody can say you are not cheap to keep. Emory stood. What he said, in the voice that had ended 100 arguments before they began, was, "The matter is settled, and will not be discussed at my table again." 40 people heard it. 40 people understood it exactly as it sounded, which was that a duke had bought a poor woman's debt and did not care to be questioned about the transaction, and that Miss Rhoda Lisle was a thing that had been settled. She rose. The whole low end of the table rose with her, because the tenants had been watching her carry coals all summer and knew what they were looking at. "Your Grace," said Rhoda, "before you close it, did you consult me?" The room was so quiet he could hear the candles. "No," said Emory. "Thank you," she said. "I only wanted it said out loud, in the room where the other thing was said." And she made him exactly the curtsy she owed him, no deeper, and walked the length of the hall and out of the door. He went after her at once, and she was not in the library, and not in her room, and the housekeeper said she had gone out to the yard, and by the time he reached the yard there was nothing but wet gravel and the smell of the rain coming. Rhoda Lisle sat up that night at the little table in the north room with a candle, and made 3 lists. The first was what she had, £141, 6 shillings, in a stocking under the boards, being every quarter of her wages taken in advance and not spent. The second was what she could raise, her mother's Bruges lace, 11 yards of it, worth £30 to the right dealer at Norwich and 12 to the wrong one, her father's theodolite, his chains, his brass levels, his case of drawing instruments, which had sat under her bed for 6 years because selling them had felt like burying him twice. The third was 1 line long, and it said, "Pay the Duke first." At 4 in the morning she wrote a letter of a fortnight's notice, in writing as agreed, and left it on the library table under the brass rule. She took nothing out of the house that she had not brought into it. She was on the Norwich mail before the kitchen was lit, and she did not tell him she was going, because she had learned that autumn exactly what happened to a plan of hers once he knew it. The vestry of Marlbrook Church on the 29th of September smelled of cold stone, tallow and the sexton's dog. The parish audits sat there twice a year, 2 churchwardens, an attorney's clerk, a table with a green cloth, and whoever in the parish had business to settle before Michaelmas quarter day. Emory Vane came at 10 minutes to 11 and stood at the back, by the poor box, with his hat in his hands. He had not slept a great deal in 8 days. He had ridden to Norwich on the 2nd day and been told at 3 lodging-houses that no one of that name was stopping there. He had ridden to Lisle's End on the 4th, and Mrs. Halloway had let him stand in the yard. "She is not here," the old woman had said, "and if she were, I would not fetch her, and you may think that hard. 51 years I have made lace, your Grace. Do you know the one thing that ruins a piece past mending? Not a dropped stitch, a helping hand." At 11 exactly the door opened and Rhoda Lisle came in out of the rain. She was thinner, her boots had been blacked over a crack. She had a canvas bag on her arm of the sort a market woman carries, and she went straight up the aisle of that little room to the green cloth and set it on the table, and Emory saw her see him at the back, and saw her decide, in about a quarter of a second, to go on exactly as she had intended. "Miss Rhoda Lisle, of Lisle's End," she said, "I am here upon the bond of the 14th of April, 6 years since, witnessed in this vestry." "The bond is not held by Sir Denholm Fire," said the clerk. "It has been assigned. I am aware of it. Is the holder present?" "He is," said Emory from the back. "Then I will pay him." She did not turn round. Sirs, I ask the wardens to cast the account before the money is touched, because the sum written on the notice is wrong, and I would rather be corrected in front of witnesses than robbed in front of none. Principal 200. Interest at 5% simple, as the bond is written and not as Sir Denholm's book has it. £660. Less £42 of wages foregone, entered in his own hand and initialed by me before His Grace's steward on the 19th of June. £218 even. The wardens cast it twice. It took 11 minutes. Nobody in the room made a sound. £218, said the elder warden. The lady has the right of it. Thank you. And Rhoda Lyle emptied the canvas bag onto the green cloth. It came out in the shape of a life. £141 6 in a knotted sking, wages taken quarterly in advance for 5 months, and not 1 shilling of it spent. £31 for 11 yards of Bruges lace, sold at Norwich to a dealer she had made bid twice. £22 for a theodolite, 3 chains, a brass level and a case of drawing instruments, sold to a surveyor in Yarmouth who had known her father and had wanted, she said, to give her 30, and had been made to give what they were worth and no more. £9 for a gold ring, her mother's, which she named aloud, flatly, without asking anybody to feel anything about it. £14 14 earned in 8 days copying out a Norwich attorney's rent roll at 3p the sheet, 420 sheets, in 8 days, which the clerk at the table looked up at when he heard. £218. She counted it out loud, coin by coin, into 3 piles, and it took a long time, and she did not hurry it, and nobody helped her. Twice Paget shifted at the back of the room. Twice Emery put a hand on his arm and held him where he stood, because there is a kind of moment a man can only ruin by entering it. 218, said the warden. Received. Your Grace, the bond, if you please. Emery came up the little aisle and laid the parchment on the green cloth in its leather case, and did not look at her, and stepped back. Miss Lyle, you may cancel it. She took the pen. She drew the line across the face of the bond herself, corner to corner, and wrote the date under it and her name under that, and the wardens signed either side, and the clerk struck the account out of the book with a ruler and a great deal of ceremony, and one of the wardens, an old man with a farmer's hands, said, "Well done, girl," in the voice men use in church. And then Rhoda Lyle opened the leather case to put the cancelled bond away, and stopped. Inside the flap, where a man keeps a thing he does not want found and cannot throw out, there was a half-mask of black moulded silk, and tied to it, torn and knotted rather than replaced, a strip of yellow Bruges lace. She looked at it for perhaps 5 seconds. Emery watched the whole of it happen in her face, the recognition, the arithmetic, the date, the 9 days, the 4 months, the 14th of June, the man in the orangery who had asked her to take nothing away from it, and had then kept the only piece of it there was. "Miss Lyle," he said, "you were the stranger." "Yes. You knew in your drawing-room," said Rhoda, "the first day. You knew when I read out the ledger. You knew on the stable roof. You knew on the night I told you that it was the one thing in my life that belonged to nobody but me, and you sat there and let me say it. And then you bought my debt without asking, so that in the end even that would have your name on it." "Yes," said Emery Vane. "Yes." She put the mask back in the case and the case on the table, and pushed it 2 inches towards him with one finger, as though returning a plate. "Then you have had it all," she said, "and I have had a stranger, and I find I liked him better." She picked up her empty canvas bag and walked out into the rain, and the churchwardens rose as she passed, both of them, without being told. Emery did not follow her. He stayed in the vestry, and when the door had shut he said, "Sirs, I should like to see the parish bond book, all of it. 6 years back. He read it there at the green cloth, 3 hours over it, while Paget rode twice to Fire Court for papers that Sir Denholm handed over with a flourish. The Michaelmas vestry reconvened on the 2nd of October, open to the parish, as the law required when an account was challenged. Sir Denholm Fire sat at the front with Cressida beside him in the new blue silk. Rhoda Lyle sat at the side on a bench. The wardens had sent for her to witness the striking of the bond book, and she had come in her old green gown with her hands folded. "I bought a bond," said Emery. "I bought it without asking the woman whose name was on it, which I shall come to, and which was the worst of the 2 things done in this parish this autumn. But I read it first, and having read one I read the rest, and I am going to lay them before the wardens now. There were 4 besides hers. A widow at Cotterill, £60 become 109. A smith, 30 become 52. A carter's family, £11 compounded for 9 years upon a debt of 4. And the parish poor stock itself, upon which Sir Denholm Fire sat as trustee, showing interest received at one rate in the ledger and entered at another in the account book. Every bond specifies simple interest, said Emery. Every account compounds it at the quarter days. It is not an error, because an error goes both ways, and this one has never once gone against the man who kept the book. Sir Denholm got up and said a great many things very loudly, and then said fewer, and then sat down. What followed was arithmetic and the law, and it took the wardens until Candlemas, and it was ugly only in the way ledgers are ugly. He repaid £194 to 5 households. He was taken off the commission of the peace in the spring. Cressida's marriage did not take place. But before any of that, while the room was still full, Emery Vane put the papers down and said, "There is a second matter, and it is mine, and I would rather say it here than have it said for me." On the 14th of June, at a masked ball at Ambervale, a young lady of this parish was dared by her sister, in front of 12 people, to kiss a masked stranger. It has been laughed about in every drawing-room in this county since. I am told the joke is that nobody would her. I was the stranger. She did not know it. She asked my leave first, which not one person in this room would have thought to do, and she told me she wanted no name and no house and nothing she might dine out on, and she was as good as her word. She has never once, in 4 months, asked me for anything at all. I knew who she was from the first hour she stood in my drawing-room. I said nothing, because a duke is agreed with and a stranger is told the truth, and I had rather be told the truth than be honest. That is the whole of it. She was not bought, at my table or anywhere. She has paid £218 in this room, in coin, out of her own wages and her mother's lace and her father's instruments, which is more than any man here has paid for anything this year, myself included. And so that no one in this parish need wonder any longer whether she was worth kissing. I have been thinking of very little else since June, and I expect to go on doing so whether or not she ever speaks to me again. Nobody applauded, because it was a vestry. But the old warden with the farmer's hands stood up, and then the smith stood up, and then the carter, and by the end of it there was very little of the room still sitting, and Cressida Fire was looking at the floor. Rhoda did not stand. She sat quite still on the side bench with her chin level, exactly as she had stood at the end of his drawing-room in June, and when it was over she went out by the side door. He gave her 11 days. Then he walked to Lyle's End on foot in an old coat, and left the horse at the turnpike, and knocked. "There is a man at the door," said Mrs. Halloway from the pillow, without turning her head, "and he has walked by the sound of the boots." "Well, go on then." Rhoda opened it and stood in the doorway and did not ask him in. "I have brought nothing," said Emery. "No paper, no draft, no arrangement, and I have told Paget that if I ever again settle a thing of yours behind your back he is to say so out loud in front of whoever is standing nearest, which was your own condition, and which I should have kept. That is a beginning. I am not going to ask you today." "No," said Rhoda, "you are not." But she leaned against the door post, and there was, at the corner of her mouth, the ghost of the fencer's inclination of the head. "Come on Saturday. She has beer, and I have 4 acres to walk, and you may make yourself useful about the gate, which has been dropping since Lady Day." He came on Saturday. He came on 11 Saturdays. In February she asked him, which he had not expected and never afterwards let her forget, and they were married at Marlbrook in April by licence, with the churchwardens in the front pew, and the Smiths family behind them. The library at Quenby was catalogued by the following June, 11,000 books in her hand, and the second folio of the Herbal entered at £90. Mrs. Halloway kept Lyle's End until the winter, and then kept the south room instead, where the light was best and the bobbins hung, and she died 4 years later in the middle of a piece, having heard the pattern go wrong and put it right. They took their tea in the library at 6, out of the cracked blue cups, which Rhoda would not have replaced. And in the drawer of the desk under the estate book, There was a half-mask of black moulded silk with a strip of torn yellow lace knotted to it, which neither of them ever mentioned, and which he could not, in the end, have said which of them had put there last.